Well, first of all, welcome, good evening. And I would like to start with talking about Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a festival of joy. During the 8th day of Hanukkah, we celebrate our religious freedom and the miracle. Following the rabbinic tradition from the Babylonian Talmud, we celebrate a miracle which occurred in the temple. According to the rabbis, one flask of oil with the seal of the high priest lasted for 8 days. We really need this miracle to happen to us every year with our diminishing natural resources and energy prices at the moment. We have all enjoyed the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, technical and technological progress, which has undoubtedly improved the quality of our life. Unfortunately, some of the improvements came at a high cost to our shared home, planet Earth. Carbon emissions, plastic pollution, depletion of biodiversity and the trees around the world, to name just a few. Last summer, during the heat wave, more of us realized what people in hotter countries than the UK were going through during the rising temperatures caused by climate change. Climate injustice, a new expression of our time, introduced into our vocabulary yet another type of injustice, from which poorer and less developed countries have been increasingly suffering in the last couple of years. The truth is that our planet is our shared home. So when any parts of our home are struggling or suffering, we eventually will feel and share their pain. On the one hand, the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, is the festival of a miracle, of hope and of faith. On the other hand, it is a festival of action. If the Maccabees family hadn't had the courage to stand up to invaders of their land, the miracle of oil would not have happened either. So tonight, we will light 4 Hanukkah candles, each representing our commitment to the following goals of climate justice, keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees, biodiversity, and having faith in our actions to achieve them. And tonight we will discuss how we can meet those challenges and contribute to mitigating the eco-problems we are all facing today. Just as our ancestors in the Hanukkah story, we are ready to face the challenges. So it is with great pleasure, I would like to invite Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, the founder of Eco Synagogue, to lead us in lighting the candles and in conversation about conquering our eco-challenges with Jamie Peters, the campaign director of Friends of the Earth, who we are delighted to have with us this evening.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Rabbi Tanya. I'll say that chant the blessings and light the candles. I'll hand back to you to sing the first verse of the Hanukkah song, Maos Tzur, and then, Jamie, I'll welcome you if that's okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של חנוכה. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שעשה ניסים לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה. הנרות הללו אנחנו מדליקים על הניסים ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו על ידי כהניך הקדושים בכל 8 ימי חנוכה. הנרות הללו קודש ואין לנו רשות להשתמש בהם אלא ליותם בלבד, כדי להודות לשמך הגדול על ניסיך ועל ישועתך ועל נפלאותיך. Rabbi Tanya.
Maos Tzur yashoti le'olam el-shabbat תיקון בית אביחתי, ושבת נזבח Shir mizmor, Chanukah mizbeach, Shir mizmor, Chanukah mizbeach.
Thank you, Rabbi Tanya. I'm going to just try to move to the side of the candles. So one of the really, I think, important aspects of the festival of Hanukkah, and with this I'm going to welcome you in a moment, Jamie Peters from Friends of the Earth, is that the candles are described as Kodesh, as holy. We are not allowed to use them. They represent something which is not reducible to monetization or commercialization. It is not a product. It's something which transcends the way we tend to express our values of things and indicates an undying, immortal, eternal life value that cannot be categorized or quantified, which is how I think many of us feel about the wonder of life and the wonder of the natural world and our planetary home. Jamie, you've been with Friends of the Earth now for many years. You have been campaigns director. You ran an anti-fracking campaign. I imagine that Jacob Rees-Mogg was not your most popular ally in that regard. You've been involved in projects across Scotland, which is your most native home. You've been involved in climate youth action, and you were very involved in COP26. But we're now also going to move on in our thinking to COP27 and COP15, which has just finished in Montreal. And I want to sort of ask some leading questions and give you space to talk about the key themes of those COPs. I'm also aware, and I didn't have time to pre-warn you, but Helen Dient, you were actually in Egypt. So be welcome if you wish, after Jamie has spoken, to say a few words about what it was like to have been at COP. I'm just been texted that I'm missing an arm, so I'll try and move the candles to one side and get my arm back. Jamie, first of all, just your most general impressions, COP27 and COP15, basically failures, successes. Were there successes within what came across as quite a challenging scene?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, Jonathan, and everyone for the invite. I know it's a really important time of year, so I feel really privileged to be asked to come along and also to witness the ceremony. So hello to everyone, thanks, first of all. And I guess when we were looking at we're dealing with such long battles when it comes to climate change and biodiversity loss. They're struggles that will outlast my life. They'll be generational, but we do often want to know if one point has been a success or a failure, and it's a legitimate question to ask. But when we look at the COP, this was COP27, the 27th meeting of the parties when it comes to, or meeting of the nations when it comes to the UN climate talks. So that in itself shows that there's not going to be one that you can say solves things or doesn't. Last year we heard a lot about Glasgow. It was the first time that UK was the president, first time it had ever been held in Glasgow. Importantly, the UK was actually the president until last month. And I'll get hopefully later to why that's really relevant in terms of how the UK's acted. But there, success or failure, there has to be positivity to take from these things always, or else we shouldn't keep doing them. And I'll just touch, Jonathan, if it's okay, maybe a couple of the things that I see as being really top line relevant when it comes to these talks. One was we got an establishment for something called the Loss and Damage Fund. Mm-hmm. So that's essentially about, countries are already going through damage, they're already experiencing loss through climate change. It's sort of easy to forget when it's pitch black outside here in London, or for me in London, and it's freezing, but it was 40 degrees this year in London, and it was even warmer in other areas of the world. Climate change is here. The countries have been experiencing loss. This is actually a fund that some nations have been fighting for since the inception of the COP, so 28 years ago. So that's a huge win, and it's important to recognize that these wins, they're not by coincidence. They come from social movements across the world pushing for them and creating the pressure. I really feel that that's when you're talking about the high stage at the international level with the UN, but things go upwards from communities that create national change and from nations feeling that pressure that creates the change at the UN. So that's important to reflect and take hope from, something which can feel sort of in short supply at times when you're doing environmental campaigning or work or whatever you like to call it. But that's a really important win. But it's only half a win.
So just sticking with that one, are there enough countries putting money into that fund, the loss and damage? And there's a really question of climate justice behind this, which is that the rich nations cause most of the pollution when the poorest nations suffer most from it. Are there enough participants who are going to put in and actually play their role in climate justice? And do you think that that number will go up in the time ahead? And how can we perhaps exert pressure that it should?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the question to be asking. Having the creation of a fund is one thing, but having funds in a fund is the other thing. And that's what the fight is now. That's where we take it on. And climate change is one of those issues where those least responsible are the ones that get hit the heaviest, and it's important. And we know that it's not a secret. We know the countries that have caused climate change are on here in the UK is one of them. So that's up to us to put the pressure for money to go into funds like that. And that's before we even speak about other financial needs in terms of climate repatriations or helping countries actually go straight to clean technology. There's still a lot of the world that don't have access to it. So there's a lot of money that needs to move when it comes to countries that have caused climate change, and there's not enough money in it now, and that's where the fight will be taking up. That's where we have to put that pressure, and we have to remind ourselves, remind everyone that climate change wasn't an accident. We've known for a long time and the causes of it, and I say this, my country anyway, UK, have benefited immensely from using a carbon budget. So no, there's not enough funds in it now, and that's where the next stage goes to.
What about the 1.5? The feeling was, I mean, it's difficult, but as Rabbi Tanya said, Hanukkah is about hope and positivity. Can we draw some hope in the 1.5 area, or is that sort of waiting till COP28?
I think that I'm naturally maybe a pessimistic Glaswegian, but we have to have hope in these things. And someone had a nice quote with me, and probably paraphrasing a little bit here, but hope is the belief that you're fighting for the right thing, you're pushing for the right thing rather than assuming it will unfold that way. So we do have hope in our hearts in these fights. 1.5 is, even if the countries had said, yeah, that's definitely what we're going to do, which we've said in the past, it comes back to the national level. What we're all doing to make sure that our own countries are going for that. The UK president, Alex Sharma, said that 1.5 is in life support. So it's still what we push for. But every degree of warming makes a difference to countries all around the world. We don't get to any end point or win or lose with climate change. There's already a lot of losers when it comes to climate change experience and loss. So 1.5, we can still make it. We have to act as fast as we can, and we need to hold pressure for decision makers. The UK as president spent over a year saying how successful Glasgow was, and one of the successes was they said that coal isn't going to we're not going to have unabated coal. It was part of the agreement in Glasgow, and they sort of spent a long time blaming countries like India who are using coal for the failure of these talks. And only last week the very same government approved a deep coal mine for the first time in 30 years. So we have to hold people account for these decisions. They are unjust, it's hypocrisy. So 1.5, we will lose hope if we keep making decisions like that. But the fact that so many people are outraged by decisions like that shows me that we've come a long way. When we were seeing people angry at having a coal mine being allowed, for instance. So I think there's hope there. The victories like the loss and damage fund, they're only because people fought for them. Social movements across the world fought for them, and it'll be the same whether we restrict warming to 1.5, less or more. It's all to play for.
I'm also a Glaswegian by birth, but I've lost the accent. So to say, I'll try and be the optimistic one. But interestingly, since you were last with us, Eco Synagogue, going to be called Eco Judaism, has got charity status, which means we can constitute ourselves. And in our constitution, lobbying on issues, you obviously can't lobby politically, but on issues. And it's quite clear that, you know, holding, as Andy Atkins of Eco Church put it, holding the feet to the fire is really important. I'm interested in how, you know, you're as Friends of the Earth has been very successful at doing that over various campaigns. Any tips?
Well, first of all, congratulations. I know the amount of work and paperwork and unseen effort that goes into getting things like that. So that's great news. And the ability for our ability as charities to hold governments, corporations to account, that's always been pushed. It's not something that we take for granted. It's been a difficult year actually for the right to protest in the UK, which is one of our campaigns. It's something that we have to continue to fight for. The UK's rankings globally in terms of the freedom to protest is going down. It's getting worse. We're not in good company globally when we look at that. So that's a right that we'll have to continue to fight for. You know, in terms of tips, I think one of my old friends at Friends of the Earth, they always speak about speaking truth to power. And I think that's a responsibility I always feel working for Friends of the Earth. When I joined Friends of the Earth, actually, Andy Atkins was the CEO. So it's nice to hear that's still his ethos. But I mean, there's lots of tips that we have, but remaining true to yourself, reaching out of your community, reaching to others and using your privileged voice, or the things that we look at within Friends of the Earth. And I'm sure it'll be the same for Eco Synagogue on the next step for you guys.
Right. No, it's that phrase of truth to power is very much the religious ethos of not just of Judaism, but certainly of Judaism. No, thank you. Moving on to COP15, I'm sure we'll come back to COP27, and the last minute sort of proposals for a third of the Earth's land mass to be used to preserve biodiversity. How do you see the outcome of COP15? Is that a more positive outcome, or are you more cautious?
There's been positivity around that for sure. I think, as ever, it's not a politician's answer, but the details are really important for these things, what it means in practice. You know, I always feel a little bit downbeat that the fact that we all the nations of the world have to get together to convince each other it's a good idea to save the natural living world. That's never a great sign that that's where we're at. The outcomes, I think they're a bit of a mixed bag. We've got some good targets and other ones to halt nature loss by 2030. The question of how we do these things and how we don't try to fool people with false solutions or changing sort of terminology, which is something we've seen in the past. But this has been seen as like a positive move. I think a really key aspect here is the recognition of the pivotal role that Indigenous and local people have in these solutions, which for me, it can sometimes feel, or for lots of people, unimaginable that the way we treat the earth is not the current predominant view where we use it to exploit, we use it to get profit. I think you touched upon in your intro, but that's not how humanity's always been. It's not inevitable. Throughout history, societies, communities across the world have lived in harmony and respect with nature. So I think a lot of this is about a mindset shift, how the view that sort of particularly Western society has just now with nature hasn't always been the way. It feels inevitable, and starting to break that is just as important as these international targets. But I'd say there's positivity that's come from it. The biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, these are the same things. It's about how we view ourselves in relation to the natural world, and it can't be separate, and it can't be one of exploitation. So moving away from that is really key to this, and I think it's a positive step. I don't want to come across too negative here. There has been a recognition that this is hopefully moving in the right direction.
Between the two COPs, well, actually both during COP27, an event that should have been taking place at Sharm el-Sheikh, actually on Mount Sinai, was moved to London because there was no permission to have it at Sharm el-Sheikh. And then we had a follow-up event in Wales with the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, with climate declarations. And after the event in Wales, declarations of repentance and good intention, we joined Stump Up for Trees, which actually a farmers organisation planting in Wales. And something I've seen across Britain, I also witnessed it in Scotland, and we see it nearer to, where many of us live. Enfield Chase is having, I think, 100 to 200,000 trees planted in it. That it feels like there's a lot of local energy going into working for biodiversity preservation in this country. Is that how you would see it, and how can we contribute best to it?
I think you're right. I mean, I often look at these things as climate and biodiversity as one. I think the divisions is not really real. So I've seen a massive upturn in interest sort of across the country when we look at the UK when it comes to these issues. There's COVID, again, it can feel like a long time ago, but there was moments where we weren't really allowed outside other than once a day, and our appreciation for nature really spiked. It grew then, but also our sense of inequality, that we don't all have the same access to the same quality of nature, grew during that period. So I think we have to be fighting to make sure that that's fair. And I think this is the hopeful bit as well. But the other side of that is, I think we're going through tough times that are ahead of us when it comes to cost of living crisis and energy, and it's about us making these spaces welcoming, not competing as our crises, but making it the same struggle that other people have around, fuel poverty. So linking up these initiatives for me is really important when we do them, making climate justice issues of broad justice, about compassion, about looking after others in our community, not letting people be left behind when it comes to these initiatives. And environmentalism, I think I've heard, it's a middle class thing, but that's never been my experience. And it's about, there's so many other people, every group cares about this. It has been my lived experience from across the country. So I see that as one of our obligations, rather than focusing on a specific biodiversity indicator, making sure that we're welcoming, that we're open, that we're having really big hearts in our community and looking after each other. For me, that is climate justice work now, because these things, they're so connected, and we're really going to have to look out for each other across the country. So that's the one thing that I see, and I want Friends of the Earth to be doing as well when it comes to local work.
I really appreciate that. And a couple of multi-faith gatherings at COP26 back in Glasgow, I was together with Cameron Shazad from Faith for the Climate and Make COP Count. And he said, we tend to think of climate justice about the global south. But if you think of parts of this country in certain in-city areas, and for instance, air quality, as well as access to green spaces, climate justice is a local issue. It's our issue. It's not somewhere else alone. Just you said, that's part of how you would understand linking issues of equality and fuel poverty with climate justice. Are you able to be more specific about the work of Friends of the Earth, or work that we could, is this about Trees for Cities? Is about, how does one work on that best?
Sure, I know it can sound, even when I say it, sometimes it can sound theoretical about interconnected struggles, but there is a concreteness to it as well. One of the Friends of the Earth campaigns that we just launched this month is around domestic heat. And of course, we want to reduce the carbon intensity that we use for domestic heat, but that's not a way I'd speak about it at all. I'd speak about it as looking after people who can't afford to keep their homes warm. There's real solutions, and again, we'd be delighted to work with, we are already working with groups, we'd be delighted to work with anyone interested. That's about looking out for people who can't afford to pay their fuel bills, and making that central to our climate justice demands. And we have, unfortunately, a huge amount of injustice and inequality within this country. We don't need to look globally for that. I spent a lot of time working in Glasgow, where there's extreme poverty, but I found there's a huge passion when it came to the projects that we ran. And to look at it even bigger, another concrete example, just to give you, which again, it might sound a little bit theoretical, but it's not. I think we're doing work around fighting against this hostile environment that the UK has created, or it's parts of the country seem to wear as a badge of honour. And climate change, like any great injustice, is going to see a movement of people being displaced. And climate justice is about creating an atmosphere that's welcoming for everyone. Tragically, we don't have to look very far, just to the channel between ourselves and France, to get an often weekly reminder of the lens that people are pushed to. These things are related to climate change, and we're not able to being a luxury to say that we care passionately about the environment unless we're making people at the centre for that. And that's the same as I've used the maybe national or global example there, but that's the same when we do things locally. We have to be listening, we have to be respectful, and we have to do stuff with big heart, because that's about us standing in solidarity with things that we might traditionally have seen not our struggle. We have to make sure that we're standing up alongside that, speaking up, and that's a lot more than carbon reduction. That's about being compassionate, bringing hope to our work, and having a big heart, like I said. And for me, I think almost, I'm sure lots of people in this call, the people that I know that got involved in environmentalism is because they were driven by a sense of justice and from a place in their heart, rather than, you know, this abstract carbon emissions reduction. It's about people, and we really have to centre that when we do any projects.
It's a really important message, because one tends to think there are kind of competing claims, and one of them is about food poverty and fuel poverty, and that's kind of one kind of issue, and the environment is another kind of issue, and which one do I support, but bringing them together and understanding them as part of a whole which is about justice is very, you know, there's plenty within Judaism which would uphold exactly that view that you've expressed. And then ask you one last question, and then ask Helen Gant, you were at COP27 in Egypt. Just take 2 or 3 minutes and tell us 1 or 2 salient points about it. I'm going to ask you just one more particular question. We're going abroad again. We had a gathering at my home about social justice. We called it Such a Thing as Society. And somebody who'd been, Cormac Hollingworth, who works with Gordon Brown, spoke. And he said, the good news is this has been a bad year for fascists, 2022. And I was kind of wondering about that, but I think he was probably referring to the defeat in the elections of Bolsonaro. Is that, how important do you rate that? How big a change? The Amazon is what is often iconic here.
Well, we should be making every year a bad year for fascists, I think, is a good way to enter any year. Yeah, Bolsonaro was defeated, but we have to remember he had huge amounts of votes in Brazil as well, which is a pause. We can't go on undivided, and we can't be us versus them and others. Not that we build bridges with fascists, that's not what I'm saying, but there's real division. We're in the UK, I think it feels like we're in a constant state of division just now, whether it's Scotland or Northern Ireland or inequalities, and we have to go along together, because like you touched upon there, the drivers of injustice are, so many of them are connected, so we have to make our drive for justice connected, and that's, you know, in a climate justice explicit way or not, that's the way that we go through. So has it been a bad year? A bad year for fascists, I like the phrase, but I think we have so much work to do. I think we always see threats like fascism, they prey on divide, they prey on any sort of vacuum if we're not sort of showing care with each other. So we're going to have to be, I could speak about Friends of the Earth. I'm actually speaking about anyone who cares about these issues and wants to build power. We have to do that in a way that's really inclusive, really listening, and not falling into the culture divides, which we look in USA, they've sort of had the last few years marked by that. I don't think we aren't that when it comes to climate change. I think every big political party sees that it's important, even if they are approving coal mines. So we have to remain open. We have to remain sort of a space that welcomes people. And as I says, making 2023 a bad one for fascists, building our struggles with refugee movements, cost of living movements, fuel poverty movements. Let's make them part of climate justice. I know the very fact that you do reach outside of your community, you build connections, you have Eco Synagogue. I'm telling you something you already know, and it's what we say within Friends of the Earth as well. We have to be making the links with others. Specifically, we are doing that with communities impacted by extractive industries, whether that's with Friends of the Earth Mozambique, whether it's in Cumbria, Northern Ireland, where we have legal cases, or whether it's with our campaign around warm homes, where we have to go to the communities that are getting left behind, that are not being listened to, and make sure that we build those bridges. So I guess that's how I'd sum it up. And again, I hope that's not very abstract, because we're trying to make it not a theoretical pursuit, but a really concrete one, where we can say that we are on the right side of history, but also on the side of the people that need people like ourselves who have the privilege to use our voice to champion their struggles too.
Really, really, thank you for everything you've said. I'm just going to go for a few moments to Helen. Helen, tell just 2 or 3 salient moments for you. You were, I think you're based in Cairo. And then we do have 1 or 2 questions, which we'll come back to you with Jamie. But let's go to Helen just for 2 or 3 minutes, if that's okay. And
thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, and Hanukkah Sameach, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, so I think first of all, I'll just start off by saying that I work for an organization called Globe International, and we are a network of legislators and parliamentarians, cross-party, non-partisan, and international. So we were in Cairo to begin with during COP27, holding our own summit, which has its focus on climate change and sustainability in Africa. And on our second day, we were focused on issues such as disaster risk reduction. And then we headed to Sharm to participate in our role within COP27. And some of the points, my kind of memorable moments from COP was, as Jamie talked about, youth action and climate justice. So I spoke on a panel. It was at the Children and Youth Pavilion in the Blue Zone. And we had a panel discussion with Young Voices of the Sahel, some really fantastic speakers and young climate activists from countries in Africa. And some of the points that we were making is, how can these climate activists make changes within their local communities, but also how can they speak to their legislators and their parliamentarians to make changes happen? So we also work with legislators and parliamentarians within Africa. So it's about top-down action and bottom-up action, and how we can get the youth activists and their elected representatives talking to each other to make real climate action happen. And as part of that, some of the work that I've done as part of the organisation is we've done a mapping report on the laws and policies in climate vulnerable countries. And one of the points that I made on the panel, and I think that COP as a whole, it's really important to be involving legislators and parliamentarians, because these are the people that are going to be going back to countries and making laws and policies to implement some of these items that appear on international conventions, not just at COP27, but as you mentioned as well, COP15, the biodiversity COPs, as well as others. So one of the things that we talked about is holding politicians to account. So making sure that you know what laws and policies are in your country, and knowing where the things in those laws aren't happening, where there are gaps in those laws. So for example, there are some countries in Africa who have some really great policies and laws already, and learning from those. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer learning that can happen. So it was really inspiring to actually have MPs from those countries come and listen to young climate activists from those countries, and be really interested in being involved in future with student MP climate surgeries, for example, which we've held in London, but we've also helped facilitate in Africa. So it was very inspiring to listen to the voices of young people, especially from some of the most climate vulnerable countries. It was also inspiring to hear from EcoPeace, as one of the things that I did was went to a panel discussion where EcoPeace were talking, and they were talking about conflict in zones where there are kind of transboundary issues with water. So obviously looking at Jordan, Israel, Palestine, but what was interesting was that these issues can also be applied elsewhere. So for example, where in countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, so using that EcoPeace model, and it was very inspiring to hear from them and the amazing work that they're doing. Yeah, I mean, there's so much I could say about COP, and I've got lots of takeaways from that, but I think a couple that I kind of fit nicely into Jamie's points is talking about young people and climate justice, as well as making sure that we can help facilitate countries that are climate vulnerable and making sure that they have laws and policies in place. That also helps facilitate funding to these countries who often find it very difficult to get that. And obviously we're talking about as part of the 100 billion finance package. So it's important that the groundwork is laid in, is there in countries who will receive the money, but also to ensure that the countries that have caused climate change are being held accountable and are contributing to that finance goal. And I think one of the biggest changes in rhetoric that I saw that came this year was that India and China are now being included in those countries where reparations are being demanded from, and it's not just kind of the developed countries, but also recognizing that India and China have had are huge polluters, major ones. So also including them in the rhetoric regarding climate justice. But yeah, I think I'm sorry, I've probably spoken for 2 or 3 minutes there.
That's good. I think we ought to hear more from you. You are our person, you are Eco-Judaism's person at COP. So I think we want to make a fuller opportunity looking ahead, Helen, to hear more from you. But that's very, very pertinent and very succinct. We have to hold you there because there are a couple of questions to you, Jamie, but I want to come back to you at another occasion, Helen. One question is, what are the key current campaigns of Friends of the Earth? And I'll just tell you the other question is, given the fact that working on environment can be disheartening and that it's Hanukkah, what are your 3 top reasons for being hopeful? Or seeing I'm looking at 4 candles in front of me here, what are your 4 top reasons for being hopeful?
Okay, I'll be to the point. But yeah, the current Friends of the Earth campaigns, so I think we've got a really thriving set of campaigns around fossil fuels, where it's around making sure the government stops their support for the fossil fuel industry. So we have a number of legal cases which are against the Cumbrian coal mine, gas caverns in Northern Ireland, fossil fuel infrastructure, gas infrastructure in Mozambique. Those are things you can all find on our website, and they're keeping going. The flagship thing for us just now is a campaign called United for Warm Homes, which is all about making sure everyone can afford the warm home. That shouldn't be like a luxury that people in the country have. We're going to experience very difficult times once the energy price bill kicks in again next year. So I'll share the link to that because it's quite clear actually for how groups can get involved, and it's all about building partnership. So that's going to be what we really focus on over the next few years, because I don't see the crisis that we're in just now being something that's going to end soon, unfortunately. So I'll share that, and that's about calling for things like no more fossil fuels, but also about immediate support for families that need it, about insulation, which would bring jobs, which would bring down emissions, which would keep people warm. So that's the big thing for Friends of the Earth just now, that's beyond our fossil fuel cases, and I'll put a link into the chat box there. Thank you. The 4 tips about how to keep up spirits, I think it was. Is that right, Jonathan? When
Yes,
things can be difficult.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a staff body that, like everyone, they really get impacted by this. They choose to join Friends of the Earth. Like I'm sure you choose to join Eco Synagogue because you care about these things, and the people that care the most can be the ones that get impacted the most in terms of being down. I seen a good quote when we did a session earlier in the year, and it was a quote, I'm not too sure who said it, but if I can't dance at your revolution, I don't want to be part of it. And what I took away from that is, like, you have to make what you're doing fun, or else people won't want to join you and you'll just burn out yourself. Like, you have to find joy yourself in what you're doing, even when it's working on difficult issues, even when it's working on really real issues. If it consumes your life and you're actually not getting joy from it, you will you will not be doing a good job. So that's actually a really important thing. It's not even an additional. And I look at myself, I had a really difficult 2 years actually at work during COVID, and I wasn't finding joy. So that's something that I try to do this time, making a bit of a separation between, you know, I'm sure, well, I know for me anyway, I do a lot of extra work when it comes to activism, but making sure that you're finding joy from that. Another thing for me is really important. From Glasgow, none of my friends are really engaged in environmentalism, so that's always like a bit of a valve to me, where they're all just sort of football obsessed. So whenever I go back home, that's like a space where I have outside of environmentalism, I guess, and that's really important as well, to make sure that you remain grounded. Other ones, I think the biggest joy I get is not just when I speak to colleagues, but when I do events like this, when I meet new groups, when I meet other people, because that's actually where you see hope. So doing as much external things with new groups as you can, whether that's events, whether it's new partnerships, for me, that just, it opens your eyes to show how many other people are working on the issues. And that's something that really, that gives me a lot of light in my work, to see what actually, you know, there's so many other people doing amazing work on this. So that's my three. The fourth one, I guess, celebrating your successes. We get way too downbeat sometimes about the scale of the problem so big that whenever you reduce it, any one initiative or any one project, even if it's stopping fracking in the UK, that's never going to be the thing that wins. You can't win, but stops climate change. But making sure you take the moment to reflect, to be grateful, and to celebrate whatever initiatives you get, whether that's an event you've done this went well, a tree planting, or it's been a legal case against the government, making sure you actually build in that celebration. So that's the 4 tips from me.
So there's actually, meanwhile, a couple more questions, but I'm just going to put one of them to you because we're coming towards the end of the time, which is a very local one. How can we put pressure on our local councils to do more? What is effective? My synagogue is quite lucky because it turns out that the person responsible for environmental policy in Barnet is actually a member of the synagogue. So
that helps.
We have ways and means. He's great. But how does one operate? I mean, that's an immediate concern, and an area where we feel as synagogues, in parts of the country, we have a significant part of the borough is Jewish, and we can work also with Eco Church. What can we do? How does one go about this?
Well, that's actually a great example. We have a campaign, and it's been our main one the last 2 years, around climate action plans, which is exactly about that, about building or making change at a council level. And the first aspect there is about building that relationship. Again, it's not about immediately being oppositional. Councils are also cash-strapped, and we have to build relationship in a constructive way. So doing that, which sounds like you've already got in place there, and then showing the depth of feeling behind something. So whatever your community is, what you're bringing to it, whether that's a Jewish community, whether it's, you know, I've lived in Brixton the past few years, whether it's a community that you have there, and then you're actually building power. And you're not just trying to win one policy thing. You're bringing people in, you're building power, and you're building a constructive relationship. If you do that with council, because there's an array of environmental issues that councils make decisions on, right? But you can start to build something. You can find out where the interest is, where the energy is. And I've always found you go where the energy is, and then you build, and that's when you start to win. So it sounds like the example you explained there is very similar to what we've done, but we had a toolkit how to do that, which again, I'm really happy to share, but it was about build that relationship, build the power that you've got, identify what the victories can be, and you'll probably find what the barriers are. Some local councils need national change, and then it allows you to also help your council get that national change. So that's a very real thing that we've been going through over the last few years.
It sounds like that toolkit would be super helpful to us, and that we should actually do something focusing on it. Really, I'm going to say my personal thank you and a word, and then hand over to Rabbi Tanya to sum up and conclude. I just want to say that one of the story of the miracle of Hanukkah is finding just one jar of oil that burnt for 8 days when it had enough in it just to burn for one. It's a fuel poverty related issue, but when somebody like yourself speaks, whatever light you put out there gets amplified, because we all pick up on your inspiration and your good ideas and your knowledge, and the flame that you give us, we can amplify and really make it last. So thank you for being such an inspiration, and thank you for saying things which will make it feel easier for us to invite you back soon. It was
Thanks
really
so much, dear
terrific.
Jonathan.
Thank you. Rabbi Tanya.
Rabbi Jonathan, Jamie, thank you so much for this stimulating, informative and inspirational conversation. I think there are lots of things we can take out or take away with us from this conversation, but one of the main things that climate change is not only ecological issue, but also social justice, social and social justice issues. And the only way to combat it by doing it together and by applying pressure on the decision makers and the government. And we can do it when we come together as a community, as different organizations, and do it together. And as Jamie said today, we've got to act quickly and we've got to act now. Thank you so much for this wonderful and enlightening evening within the lines of Hanukkah story. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us tonight and everyone who will be watching us as well. Hanukkah, happy Hanukkah, Chag Sameach.
Thank you.
Chag Sameach.
And looking forward to the next Jewish festival in the calendar.
Yes, absolutely.
Over to you, Andrea.
I got all stimulated and inspired, and forgot to introduce our project manager, Andrea, who will tell you all about our next Tu B'Shvat event.
Thanks, Tanya. And thank you very much, Jamie, for joining us tonight. It was a really good session. And I'd just like to tell you, so as Jonathan mentioned earlier on, we have recently managed to gain charity status for Eco-Judaism, of which Eco Synagogue will be one of the projects that we'll deliver through the Eco-Judaism umbrella, which is very exciting for us. And the first event that we'll hold under that format will be for Tu B'Shvat. The posters and the information will be coming out shortly, but our event will be on Sunday evening, the 5th of February, which is Tu B'Shvat at 8 o'clock by Zoom, Trees for Life and Food for Thought. And what we're asking is that in your own communities, you'll probably be having or planning a Tu B'Shvat Seder. So please register for our as a community for some special community resources, and then join us on Zoom after your Seder for an interactive program, which will include, and we're very honoured to welcome, George Monbiot, the well-known regular columnist for The Guardian, writer and political activist on environmental issues, who will be talking to Rabbi Jonathan in a pre-recorded conversation, and we will be following that with our interactive programme. So look out for that poster. Please join us on Tu B'Shvat, and thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. And first of all, Jamie and Robert Jonathan again. Night, night, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, everybody.
Andrea, Angelina, and everyone. Donna.
Yeah, big thank you to Angelina and Donna.
Helen. Thank you, Helen. We need to hear more. We need to hear more. Thank you.